I still remember the sting of humiliation as I stood frozen in the parking lot of Riverstone Restaurant, watching my 3 adult children pose for selfies next to my weathered 1997 Honda Civic. Christine dramatically covered her eyes in mock embarrassment while Ryan pointed at the rust spots above the wheel wells, and Amy pretended to push the car as if it couldn't possibly start on its own. Their laughter carried across the evening air, slicing through my heart with each snicker. "Mom's prehistoric fossil," Ryan called it, loud enough for arriving guests to hear. "We should donate it to a museum." These weren't teenagers, mind. These were accomplished professionals in their 30s, dressed in designer clothes, who had arrived in vehicles worth more than my annual teaching salary. And they were laughing at the car that had faithfully carried them to college visits, doctor appointments, and countless sporting events throughout their childhoods. Little did they know that the 3 envelopes tucked inside my purse would transform their smug amusement into shocked silence before the evening ended. After 32 years molding young minds at Oakwood Elementary, I'd learned a thing or two about delivering life-changing lessons. Some lessons arrive with gold stars and gentle guidance. Others require a more dramatic approach. Tonight would definitely be the latter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Barbara Mitchell. For over 3 decades, I taught 4th grade at Oakwood Elementary in the quiet suburb of Mapleton, guiding hundreds of children through fractions, state capitals, and the fundamentals of written expression. My classroom was always the one with handmade decorations rather than store-bought, creative projects covering every wall, and a reading corner filled with books I'd collected from yard sales and library discards. Parents requested my class for their children year after year, knowing I'd push them to excel while making learning feel like an adventure rather than a chore. The district had twice named me Teacher of the Year, and former students regularly returned to tell me how my belief in them had shaped their futures. Outside school, I was a mother of 3 and a widow since the age of 34, when my husband Daniel was killed by a drunk driver on his way home from work. Christine was just 8 then, Ryan 6, and Melissa barely 4 years old. The insurance, money covered funeral expenses and a few months of mortgage payments, but nothing more. While well-meaning friends suggested I sell our modest split-level home and find something more manageable, I refused to uproot my children when they'd already lost their father. Instead, I learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed for mercy. That Honda Civic entered our lives the year after Daniel died, when my previous car finally surrendered after 200,000 miles. It wasn't new even then, already 5 years old with 60,000 miles on the odometer. But it was the most sensible choice for a single mother on a teacher's salary with 3 young children to raise. The dealership had offered flashier options, with affordable monthly payments, but I calculated that each dollar saved on transportation could go toward college funds, music lessons, or the occasional pizza night that brought smiles to my children's faces. For 24 years, that Civic had been my faithful companion. It carried grocery bags, science projects, and sleeping children. Its trunk had held camping gear for budget vacations, dorm supplies for college move-ins, and countless boxes of classroom materials. When the air conditioning failed during a brutal summer heat wave, I drove with the windows down rather than spend the $800 repair bill that could instead cover Ryan's soccer camp. When the radio stopped working, I taught the children to sing road trip songs rather than replace it. Each mechanical challenge became a lesson in prioritizing needs over wants, lessons I thought my children had absorbed along with their advanced degrees and professional success. Apparently, I had been mistaken. The retirement dinner had been Christine's idea. "You deserve recognition, Mom," she had insisted during one of her monthly calls. 32 years of dealing with other people's kids? We need to celebrate that. She was a marketing executive now, with a corner office in a downtown high-rise, and 2 children who spent more time with their nanny than with her. Ryan, a successful orthopedic surgeon, had immediately volunteered to handle the reservations, securing a private room at Riverstone, the most exclusive restaurant in the county, where he regularly entertained colleagues. Melissa, my youngest, an attorney specializing in corporate law, had arranged for a professional photographer to document the evening. "We need proper photos, Mom," she'd explained with the slightly condescending tone that had become her trademark, not just smartphone snapshots. Their generosity should have touched me. Instead, it left me wondering when exactly my children had transformed from the compassionate, grounded individuals I thought I'd raised into these status-conscious adults who seemed increasingly embarrassed by my modest lifestyle. The shift had been gradual, so subtle I barely noticed it happening. It began when Christine purchased her first luxury car, casually mentioning that I should park my older model further down the street when visiting her in her newly gentrified neighborhood. Then came Ryan's housewarming party in Lakeside Estates, where he introduced me to his colleagues as the reason he'd worked so hard to get out of the public school system, as if my career had been some kind of cautionary tale rather than a calling. Melissa's transformation manifested in her increasingly expensive gifts that I never asked for: cashmere sweaters to replace my comfortable cardigans, high-end cookware to replace perfectly functional pots and pans, spa certificates with gentle suggestions that I might enjoy updating my look. For years, I'd smiled through these small humiliations, reminding myself that their financial success had been precisely what I'd sacrificed for. Wasn't this the American dream? Children who surpassed their parents' station in life? But something had shifted inside me during my final year of teaching, as retirement loomed and I considered what the next chapter of my life might hold. The catalyst was a conversation overheard at Thanksgiving dinner 6 months earlier. I had stepped back into the kitchen to retrieve the pumpkin pies while my children and their spouses lingered over wine in the dining room. "Did you talk to her about selling the house?" That was Christine's husband, Mark, his voice carrying clearly through the serving hatch. "Not yet," Ryan replied. "But we need to. This place is falling apart, and honestly, it's becoming an embarrassment." "She can't possibly maintain it on her retirement income," Melissa added pragmatically. "We should look into those senior communities. The one near my office has activities, dining options. And no maintenance headaches for us to deal with later," Christine finished. "Plus, she could use the equity from this place to actually live comfortably. Maybe even finally replace that death trap she calls a car." "I still can't believe she drives that thing," Mark laughed. "My teenagers would refuse to be seen in it." "It's beyond stubborn at this point," Ryan sighed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's like she's intentionally living in the past. I stood frozen, pies in hand, as their words washed over me. The home they so casually dismissed as falling apart had been lovingly maintained through decades of tight budgets. Its mortgage, paid off 5 years earlier after I'd taken on summer school teaching and weekend tutoring to make the final payments. The car they mocked as a death trap had passed every safety inspection and received meticulous maintenance, often with parts I'd sourced myself from salvage yards to save money. Most painfully, they spoke as if my choices stemmed from inability, rather than deliberate prioritization. As if the mother who had managed to raise 3 children alone while sending them to college debt-free somehow couldn't make rational financial decisions. I served the pie that night with slightly trembling hands, but said nothing. Instead, I began taking stock of my finances, my possessions, and most importantly, my dreams. What emerged surprised even me. While my salary had never been substantial, 3 decades of disciplined saving and careful investing had created a nest egg my children clearly knew nothing about. The outdated furniture they subtly criticized had been selected for durability rather than style, and much of it would outlast their more fashionable pieces. And most significantly, the international teaching program I'd dismissed 15 years earlier as impractical while raising children was still accepting experienced educators for positions abroad. That night, after they'd all departed in their luxury vehicles, I sat at my kitchen table, the same solid oak table where we'd done homework, celebrated birthdays, and shared thousands of family meals, and made a decision. My retirement would not be dictated by my children's perceptions of what was appropriate for a woman of my age and station. It would be shaped by my own deferred dreams and the wisdom accumulated through decades of watching dreams transform into delusions in the relentless pursuit of status. Over the following months, I methodically prepared. I applied to the International Educators Program and was accepted for a 2-year position teaching English in Vietnam. I consulted with my longtime financial advisor, who helped me establish the Daniel Mitchell Memorial Scholarship for aspiring teachers from single-parent households. I interviewed potential renters for my home, eventually selecting a young music teacher and her daughter, who reminded me powerfully of myself and Christine all those years ago. And I prepared 3 identical envelopes, each containing a check, and a letter explaining my decisions. These envelopes waited in my desk drawer as my retirement date approached, as the party plans materialized, as I considered and reconsidered whether this dramatic gesture was necessary. Perhaps, I reasoned, I was overreacting to casual comments. Perhaps direct conversation would be more mature than the object lesson I was contemplating. Then came the evening of the retirement party, and the sight of my children, my accomplished, privileged children, laughing at the very car that symbolized the sacrifices that had enabled their success. In that moment, any doubt evaporated. Some lessons cannot be delivered gently. Some realizations require the shock of sudden clarity. Tonight would be such a lesson. I smoothed my dress, a simple but elegant navy blue sheath I'd purchased on sale years earlier, and walked toward them, my sensible low heels clicking on the pavement. The sound alerted them to my presence, and they turned with expressions, shifting rapidly from amusement to embarrassment to forced brightness. "Mom!" Christine recovered first, her smile too wide. "You're early! We were just taking photos with my car," I finished for her, my voice calmer than I felt. I noticed. An uncomfortable silence fell. Ryan cleared his throat. We're just remembering all the road trips this old thing took us on. Remember the camping disaster at Lake Millbrook when it rained for 3 days straight? I remember everything about that car, I said simply. Every soccer practice, every college visit, every hospital trip when Melissa broke her arm. I remember the choice between replacing it and contributing to your law school expenses, Melissa. I remember declining the faculty trips to New York so I could pay for your medical conference in Chicago, Ryan. I remember the second job I took to cover both Christine's bridal shower and a new transmission. I remember it all. Their expressions shifted again. Discomfort, perhaps a flicker of shame, then quick rationalizations forming behind their eyes. "Mom, we were just having a little fun," Melissa said, slipping her arm through mine. "The photographer. We'll be arriving soon. Let's get you inside. You're the guest of honor, after all." I allowed myself to be guided into the restaurant, aware that the moment for my planned revelation had not yet arrived. The private dining room was tastefully decorated with flowers, photographs from my teaching career, and a banner proclaiming, "Happy retirement, Mrs. Mitchell." Former colleagues, a few close friends, and my children's spouses were already mingling, wine glasses in hand. The dinner itself was lovely, I have to admit. The food was exquisite, the speeches heartfelt. My department head recalled my first year teaching and the reading program I'd developed that became a district standard. A former student, now a teacher himself, spoke about my influence on his career choice. Christine, Ryan, and Melissa each offered polished tributes to my dedication as both teacher and mother. "Our mom taught us perseverance," Christine told the assembled guests. "She showed us that obstacles are just opportunities wearing disguises." "She instilled in us the value of education," Ryan added. Not just formal learning, but curiosity about the world. And she demonstrated that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, Melissa concluded, but in positive impact on others. Their words were perfect, exactly what any mother would want to hear from her children. Yet, as I looked at them, elegantly, dressed and comfortably inhabiting this exclusive space, I wondered if they truly understood the lessons they claimed to have learned. Did they recognize the perseverance in my carefully maintained Honda? Did they value the education in choosing financial security over status symbols? Did they measure wealth by impact rather than possessions in their own lives? Or only in mine? The dessert arrived. Individual chocolate soufflés that probably cost more than a week's worth of groceries during those lean early years. As coffee was served, the restaurant manager approached with a small wrapped box. "A retirement gift from your children, Mrs. Mitchell," he announced. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with 4 charms, a tiny apple, a book, a house, and a car. The symbolism wasn't subtle. "The car charm is modern, Mom," Christine pointed out with a smile. "A little aspiration for your next chapter." The table erupted in appreciative laughter. Even my friends and colleagues joined in, no doubt, thinking this gentle teasing was familiar family banter, rather than the culmination of years of subtle diminishment. I fingered the bracelet, genuinely touched by its thoughtfulness, while simultaneously recognizing the inherent message. Your past is charming, but outdated. Your future should align more closely with our vision for you. It's beautiful, I said. Sincerely. Thank you. Then I reached into my purse and removed 3 identical cream-colored envelopes, each bearing one of my children's names in my distinctive teacher handwriting. "I have something for each of you as well," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Something to mark not just the end of my teaching career, but the beginning of my next adventure." I handed the envelopes across the table, watching as confusion and curiosity crossed their faces. They were accustomed to receiving gifts from me, carefully chosen books, homemade cookies, knitted scarves, and increasingly, checks for birthdays and Christmas as their wish lists exceeded my budget. But this formal presentation was unusual. "Should we open them now?" Ryan asked, always conscious of social protocol. "Please do," I replied, taking a deliberate sip of my coffee. They opened the envelopes simultaneously, each removing a check and a letter. The checks were identical, $15,000 each, representing the most I could give without triggering gift tax implications. The letters, while personalized, contained similar messages. The silence that fell over the table was profound. Christine's perfectly manicured hand trembled slightly as she held her check. Ryan's professional composure cracked as his eyes moved rapidly between the check and the letter. Melissa, my pragmatic youngest, read her letter twice before looking up at me. "Vietnam?" She finally broke the silence. "For 2 years?" The other guests at the table looked at each other in confusion. This clearly wasn't the retirement plan they'd expected to hear. "Yes," I confirmed. "I leave in 3 weeks. The International Educators Program has placed me at an English language academy in Ho Chi Minh City. Housing is provided, along with a stipend that will more than cover my needs." "But what about your house?" Christine asked, her marketing-trained voice unable to fully hide her dismay. "Rented to a lovely young music teacher and her daughter. The income will fund my travels during school breaks. I'm particularly looking forward to exploring Thailand and Cambodia." "And that check," Ryan began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "That represents a portion of what I've saved over the years. By making practical choices you've clearly interpreted as limitations," I explained, my tone gentle but firm. "Driving a reliable older vehicle instead of making car payments. Maintaining and renovating my home myself rather than hiring contractors. Preparing meals at home instead of dining at establishments like this. These choices weren't made because I couldn't afford alternatives, but because I prioritized financial security and your educational opportunities over status symbols. I paused, allowing my words to sink in. The checks are your inheritance. Portion of it anyway, paid in advance. The remainder has established the Daniel Mitchell Memorial Scholarship for aspiring teachers from single-parent households. The first recipient will be selected next month. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Christine's husband, Mark. "I don't understand," he said, looking genuinely perplexed. "If you could afford a newer car all this time, why drive that old Honda? Why live so frugally?" I smiled at him, appreciating his directness. Because the purpose of money isn't to impress others with what you have, but to create the life you want. That Honda represented freedom from debt, security for my children's education, and choices that aligned with my values rather than external expectations. It was never about what I couldn't afford, but about what I chose not to prioritize. I looked at each of my children in turn, seeing the slow dawning of understanding in their eyes. The greatest lesson I tried to teach you wasn't about stretching, dollars, or maintaining older possessions. It was about defining success on your own terms, rather than through others' perceptions. Somewhere along the way, I think that lesson got lost. Melissa, always quickest to process new information, set her letter down carefully. "So all these years when we've been worrying about you financially, suggesting you downsize or move somewhere more appropriate, I was making conscious choices based on priorities you didn't recognize or value," I finished for her. "Just as I'm doing now by choosing Vietnam over a senior community, adventure over predictability, and new experiences over familiar comforts." The evening concluded shortly after my announcement, the festive atmosphere having shifted to something more contemplative. My colleagues and friends offered enthusiastic support for my international plans, while my children remained subdued, processing what they'd learned. As guests departed, Ryan approached me in the restaurant's elegant foyer, his expression troubled. "Are you doing this to punish us?" he asked quietly. "For the car jokes and the comments about your house?" I placed my hand on his arm, this son who'd grown from a curious little boy into a skilled surgeon, yet somehow missed the most important diagnosis. "No, Ryan. I'm doing this because for 32 years I've taught children to explore their potential, to embrace challenges, and to view the world with curiosity rather than fear. It's time I followed my own teaching. The fact that my decision has exposed some misconceptions about your mother is secondary, though perhaps necessary." The drive home that night was strangely peaceful. The Honda that had been a source of mockery just hours earlier now felt like a trusted confidant, its familiar creaks and worn upholstery testifying to years of faithful service. I patted the dashboard affectionately as I pulled into my driveway, acknowledging that our journey together was nearing its end. In Vietnam, I would navigate the bustling streets of Ho Chi Minh City by foot, bicycle, or perhaps a small scooter. Another adventure awaiting me. Inside my house, the home my children had deemed falling apart, I kicked off my sensible shoes and made a cup of chamomile tea. The antique clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from Daniel's parents, chimed midnight as I settled into my reading chair, mentally preparing for the conversations that would inevitably follow. Tonight had been merely the opening act of a family reckoning long overdue. The first call came before my morning coffee had finished brewing. Christine, always the strategist, preferred to address problems head-on. "Mom, we need to talk about this Vietnam situation," she began, her voice striving for calm reasonableness. "It seems very impulsive. Have you really thought it through?" I smiled at her familiar approach. 30 years of thinking about it, 15 years of researching it, and 6 months of active planning. Yes, I'd say I've thought it through. But Vietnam? It's so far away, and the medical care is excellent in Ho Chi Minh City. I completed her sentence. The program includes comprehensive health insurance with access to international hospitals. I've done my research, Christine. "What about Emma and Tyler?" she countered, invoking her children. my grandchildren. They'll barely see you. This was fair, a genuine concern rather than a manipulation. I'll miss them terribly, I acknowledged. But the program includes 3 extended breaks annually when I can either return home or they can visit me. We'll have quality time rather than the hurried dinners and distracted afternoons that currently constitute our relationship. And think of the educational opportunity for them, experiencing a completely different culture firsthand. But why? Now? Why not take a European vacation first? Ease into retirement, see how you feel. The question revealed so much about how my daughter viewed me, as someone needing to ease into life changes rather than embrace them directly. Because I'm 62, not 82, I replied gently. I'm healthy, energetic, and have skills to offer. This isn't a retirement hobby, Christine. It's meaningful work in a place that values experienced teachers. The conversation continued in circles, Christine cycling through concern, disbelief, reluctant understanding, and back to concern. Eventually, she sighed deeply. I still don't fully get it, but it's your life, she conceded. Just promise. You'll stay in touch. Daily updates, okay? Weekly video calls, I countered. And I'll start a blog for those who want more frequent glimpses into my new life. Ryan's approach came later that day, a surprise visit bearing a peace offering of my favorite pastries from Riverside Bakery. Always the middle child peacemaker, he chose a gentler angle. I've been thinking about what you said last night, he began as we sat on the back porch with our coffee and cinnamon rolls. About choices versus limitations? I hoped you might, I replied, giving him space to continue. He twisted his coffee mug between surgeons' hands that had performed countless delicate operations, but seemed awkward in this moment of emotional vulnerability. When I was in medical school, I had a roommate from a wealthy family. His parents bought him a luxury car for graduation. I was so envious, comparing it to your Honda. I nodded, remembering his thinly veiled comments about the car during his rare visits home during those years. What I didn't know then was that his parents had also arranged his medical school admission through family connections. They'd purchased his entire life path. Meanwhile, I'd earned my spot through merit, worked alongside the best in my field despite our modest background. He met my eyes directly. You gave me something far more valuable than a fancy car, Mom. You gave me the chance to become who I am on my own terms. The conversation with Ryan unfolded more productively, exploring misconceptions and rediscovering the values that had shaped his childhood. He expressed genuine interest in the Vietnam position, asking thoughtful questions about the curriculum I'd be teaching and the students I'd be working with. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated by the front door. About the check, I don't feel right keeping it. It's not charity, Ryan, I explained. It's acknowledging that your education and success were always the priority over material upgrades for me. Use it for something meaningful, something that reflects values rather than status. Melissa's reaction came 3 days later. After what I imagined was careful analysis and extensive research, her approach to every situation since childhood. She arrived at my house with a thick folder tucked under her arm and a determined expression. I've reviewed your Vietnam proposal, she announced as she settled at my kitchen table, spreading documents with meticulous precision. Your financial planning is sound, though I have concerns about the emergency contingency fund. International medical evacuation can cost upwards of $100,000 in severe cases. I suppressed a smile at her businesslike approach to what most would consider a deeply personal matter. The program provides evacuation insurance, Melissa. It's in Section 4 of the contract. She flipped immediately to the relevant page, skimming the text with her lawyer's eye. The coverage ceiling is adequate, assuming standard medical circumstances. However, I've prepared a secondary emergency protocol. She slid a document across the table. Power of attorney for medical decisions. access to your accounts if you're incapacitated, and a communication tree for various emergency scenarios. This was how Melissa processed emotional upheaval, through practical action and meticulous planning. While Christine expressed her feelings directly and Ryan sought connection through shared experiences, Melissa transformed concern into contingency. Plans. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her thorough care. "This is very helpful." She nodded briskly, then hesitated before pulling out another document. "I also researched property management companies as alternatives to your current arrangement. With the music teacher, several offer more comprehensive services, including regular inspections and maintenance oversight." I recognized this for what it was, not criticism of my decision, but an attempt to strengthen it with her professional expertise. "I'd welcome your recommendations," I replied, "though I believe Ms. Winters will be an excellent tenant." Melissa relaxed slightly, her shoulders losing some of their rigid posture. "This is really happening, isn't it? You're actually moving to Vietnam." "I really am. It's just so..." She searched for words, unusual for my articulate daughter. "Unexpected. You've always been so consistent, so reliable, the steady presence we could all count on." "Reliability doesn't mean predictability, Melissa. It means being true to your values, even when they surprise others." She absorbed this, her analytical mind processing its implications. "You've been planning this for months, evaluating options, preparing everything meticulously, while we were suggesting senior living communities and patronizing you about your car." "Yes," I confirmed simply. "We completely misread you. You saw what you expected to see, a mother approaching retirement age, making do with limited resources. You didn't consider that my choices might be deliberate rather than dictated by circumstance." Melissa, ever precise, corrected me gently. "No, it's worse than that. We saw what confirmed our narrative about ourselves, that our financial success represented wisdom and sophistication that you lacked. It was easier to believe we knew better than to consider you might have different priorities that were equally valid." Her insight surprised me. Of my 3 children, Melissa had always been the most pragmatic, the least given to introspection. Yet here she was, cutting to the heart of the matter with surgical precision. "That's very perceptive," I acknowledged. "I'm a corporate lawyer, Mom. Understanding human motivation is part of my job." She gathered her documents, reorganizing them with practiced efficiency. "For what it's worth, I think Vietnam is a fascinating choice. Economically dynamic, politically stable, excellent food." "High praise indeed," I smiled. "Just be careful with street food. Hepatitis A is endemic in the region. I've included vaccination recommendations in Appendix B." And there was the Melissa I knew, blending genuine support with practical concerns, transforming connection into concrete action. As she left, she hugged me tightly, whispering, "I'm proud of you." Words I couldn't remember hearing from her since she'd passed the bar examination a decade earlier. The weeks that followed brought a flurry of activity as my departure date approached. Sorting through decades of possessions, deciding what to store, what to donate, and what to bring with me to Vietnam became a daily exercise in evaluating what truly mattered. The process was both challenging and liberating. My children's responses to this process continued to evolve. Christine, initially the most resistant to my plans, gradually shifted from attempting to dissuade me to helping me prepare. She created a detailed packing list based on her own business travels to Southeast Asia, researched Vietnamese customs to smooth my cultural transition, and scheduled weekly video calls with her children so they could track Grandma's adventure. Ryan took a more hands-on approach, helping me digitize important documents, configure my laptop for international use, and install communication apps that would work reliably across continents. During these practical sessions, our conversations often turned reflective. "I've been thinking about what you said, about defining success on your own terms. he mentioned while scanning old family photographs into digital files. I'm not sure I've ever really done that. Medical school, marriage, the house in Lakeside Estates. It all just seemed like the next expected step on a predetermined path. It's never too late to reconsider that path, I suggested gently. He nodded thoughtfully. Watching you break free from our expectations has been illuminating. Challenging, but illuminating. Melissa's contribution came in the form of a comprehensive digital folder she called Operation Vietnam, containing everything from local emergency numbers to cultural etiquette guides to weather patterns throughout the year. Knowledge is preparedness, she explained simply. 10 days before my departure, Christine organized a family dinner at her home. Not a formal goodbye party, but an intimate gathering to mark the transition. Unlike the retirement dinner at Riverstone with its performance-like quality and emphasis on appearances, this evening felt genuine. We gathered around Christine's dining table, enjoying a meal she'd prepared herself rather than catered. A gesture that touched me deeply, knowing how rarely she cooked given her demanding schedule. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on memories, future plans, practical arrangements for my absence, and unexpectedly profound reflections on family dynamics. I keep thinking about that car, Christine admitted over dessert. How we laughed at it, completely missing what it represented. Which was? I prompted, curious about her perspective. Freedom, she replied thoughtfully. Financial freedom from unnecessary debt. Freedom from the pressure to impress others. Freedom to allocate resources according to your actual priorities rather than external expectations. She smiled ruefully. Everything I struggle with daily in my own life. Ryan nodded in agreement. I just bought a new SUV last month, $78,000, fully loaded with features I'll probably never use. The monthly payment would cover a year of college for a deserving student. We're not saying material comforts are wrong, Melissa clarified, ever the precise thinker. Just acknowledging that we've conflated luxury with necessity, status with value. And perhaps mistaken your deliberate choices for limitations, Christine added softly. The evening concluded with promises of regular communication, plans for visits during my breaks, and a genuine sense of resolution that, while not erasing past misunderstandings, acknowledged them as part of our shared growth. As my departure date neared, practical matters dominated my days. My faithful Honda found a new home with a young teacher at Oakwood Elementary, a single mother who reminded me powerfully of myself 3 decades earlier. This car has history, I told her as I handed over the keys. It's transported children to soccer games and college tours, carried groceries and science projects. It deserves an owner who values reliability over flash. It's perfect, she assured me, running her hand appreciatively over the well-maintained dashboard. My budget doesn't stretch to car payments, and my daughter needs braces this year. I understand priorities, I smiled, feeling a sense of completion as this faithful companion passed to someone who would value it appropriately. The music teacher and her daughter moved into my house 2 days before my departure, their excitement about the space, which they deemed absolutely beautiful, rather than falling apart, confirming I'd made the right choice in tenants. The young girl, about 8 years old, asked shyly if she could use the reading nook in the bay window. My mom says it was your favorite spot. It still is, I confirmed. The morning light is perfect for reading adventures before school. My final evening at home, my children gathered to help with last-minute preparations and share a simple meal around my kitchen table, the same solid oak table where we'd done homework, celebrated birthdays, and weathered countless family storms. Together, as we finished dinner, I presented each of them with a small gift, not monetary this time, but deeply personal. For Christine, my grandmother's recipe book, filled with handwritten notes and cooking wisdom spanning generations. Because sometimes, the most valuable inheritances aren't financial, I explained as she traced the faded handwriting with reverent fingers. For Ryan, a compass that had belonged to his father, Daniel's prized possession from his own father, carried through hiking trips and camping adventures until his death. To help you find your authentic path, I said simply. For Melissa, a wooden box containing letters I'd written but never sent throughout her childhood and young adulthood, reflections on her growth, her strengths, my hopes for her future. Because behind my practical exterior was always this deeper current of feeling, I explained as she opened the first envelope with uncharacteristic emotion. These gifts, worth little in monetary terms but priceless in meaning, seemed to touch them more deeply than the checks I'd presented at the retirement dinner, perhaps because they represented connection rather than correction, love rather than lesson. As the evening concluded, we stood together in my front yard under a canopy of stars, the reality of tomorrow's departure finally settling over us. I'm still not entirely comfortable with this, Christine admitted, always the most direct about her feelings. But I'm trying to see it through your eyes rather than mine. And from that perspective, it's actually pretty amazing. Courageous, Ryan added, stepping into the unknown at 62 when most people are settling into familiar routines. Strategically sound, Melissa contributed, making us all smile at her characteristic assessment. Maximizing skills, exploring new markets, diversifying life experience. Their words, while different in tone and perspective, shared a common thread, genuine respect, rather than the thinly veiled condescension that had characterized their previous attitudes toward my choices. Thank you, I said simply, for beginning to see me as I am, rather than as you assumed me to be. The following morning brought the inevitable flurry of last-minute checks, reminders, and emotional farewells at the airport. Christine fussed. Over my carry-on arrangements, Ryan monitored the flight status with obsessive attention, and Melissa reviewed emergency protocols one final time, each managing anxiety through their characteristic approaches. As the boarding announcement came, I embraced each of my children in turn, feeling the complex mixture of emotions that accompanies any significant transition. Sadness at the temporary separation, excitement for the adventure ahead, and a profound sense of rightness about the path I'd chosen. This isn't goodbye, I reminded them. It's just a new chapter in our story. With better understanding on our part, Christine added, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And maybe some new perspectives when you return, Ryan suggested. Statistically, international experience enhances cognitive flexibility and cultural intelligence, Melissa offered, her way of expressing support through factual reassurance. As I walked toward the security checkpoint, I turned back for one final wave. My 3 children stood together, so accomplished in their professional lives, yet still growing in emotional wisdom, much like their mother. The journey that had begun with laughter at an old Honda had led us to this moment of mutual respect and renewed connection. The path ahead would bring challenges, discoveries, and inevitable moments of doubt. But as I moved forward into this next chapter, I carried with me the knowledge that sometimes the most valuable lesson we can teach our children isn't about financial management or practical compromise, but about the courage to define success on our own terms, even when it contradicts others' expectations. Especially when it contradicts others' expectations. The flight to Vietnam would take nearly 20 hours, with layovers in San Francisco and Tokyo. As the plane lifted off, carrying me toward a future I'd dreamed of for decades, I felt a profound sense of liberation, not from my family, whom I loved deeply despite our misunderstandings, but from the limitations of being defined by others' perceptions rather than my own choices. The envelopes I'd handed my children that night at Riverstone Restaurant had contained checks, yes, but their true contents had been permission for me to reclaim my narrative, for them to see me clearly, and for all of us to recognize that life's most meaningful journeys rarely follow expected paths. They tend to resemble my faithful old Honda instead, perhaps lacking external flash, but remarkably reliable in reaching meaningful destinations. The journey to Vietnam unfolded in a series of long flights, brief layovers, and the surreal disorientation of crossing multiple time zones. 26 hours after leaving my children at the airport, I emerged into the humid embrace of Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon, a metropolis of nearly 9 million people pulsing with energy and contradictions. Ancient temples stood in the shadows of gleaming skyscrapers, traditional market vendors operated alongside trendy cafes, and the constant symphony of motorbike horns provided the city's distinctive soundtrack. A representative from the International Educators Program met me at the airport, a young Vietnamese woman named Mai, whose perfect English was delivered with a charming Australian accent, the result, she explained, of university studies in Melbourne. She navigated us through chaotic traffic to my new home, a modest but comfortable apartment in District 3, centrally located and within walking distance of the language academy where I would teach. Most foreign teachers find the first month challenging, Mai warned as she helped me settle in. The heat, the noise, the different customs. But those who embrace it rather than resist often find something transformative here. Her words proved prophetic. Those early weeks tested me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The relentless humidity that left my clothes perpetually damp. The bewildering street food vendors whose offerings I couldn't identify but gradually learned to appreciate. The language barrier that transformed simple errands into complex puzzles requiring creative problem-solving. Yet within these challenges lay precisely the adventure I had sought. The opportunity to grow beyond comfortable routines and rediscover the exhilaration of learning something new each day. My teaching schedule included morning classes with business professionals seeking to improve their English for international commerce, afternoon sessions with university students preparing for overseas studies, and evening conversation groups, with a diverse mix of locals eager to practice with a native speaker. The work was demanding, but deeply satisfying. My decades of educational experience finding new applications in this foreign context. I established weekly video calls with my children as promised, our conversations evolving as the novelty of my situation gave way to routine. Christine's initial anxious questioning, "Are you eating properly? Is your neighborhood safe?" gradually shifted to genuine curiosity about Vietnamese culture and my daily experiences. Ryan's perfunctory check-ins transformed into engaged discussions about the educational differences I was observing, often extending beyond our scheduled time as he asked thoughtful questions about teaching methodologies across cultures. Melissa, true to form, maintained precise records of our conversations, creating a shared document of practical information we might need in various scenarios, a gesture of care expressed through her characteristic attention to detail. As for my grandchildren, our digital connection flourished in unexpected ways. Emma and Tyler, initially reluctant participants in Grandma's boring video calls, became enthusiastic virtual explorers as I took them on tablet tours of local markets, historic sites, and eventually my classroom, where my Vietnamese students delighted in practicing English with American children. What began as obligation evolved into highlight of their week, with Emma maintaining a special notebook of Vietnamese words and Tyler collecting facts about Southeast Asian wildlife to share with his science class. 3 months into my Vietnamese adventure, I received the first substantive update on the Daniel Mitchell Memorial Scholarship. The inaugural recipient, a 34-year-old single mother of 2 pursuing her teaching credential, had written a letter of gratitude that the selection committee forwarded to me. Her words, describing how the financial support allowed her to reduce her work hours and spend more time with her children while completing her education, carried echoes of my own journey decades earlier. The circle of support extending beyond my immediate family into a stranger's life brought satisfaction deeper than any luxury purchase could have provided. My blog, initially created to keep my children informed between our calls, gradually attracted a modest following beyond family. Former colleagues shared it with current teachers. Friends passed the link to other retirees contemplating unconventional paths. A local newspaper even featured it in an article about alternative retirement choices. The comments section filled with messages from readers in their 60s and 70s, some expressing admiration for my courage, others sharing their own dreams of meaningful second acts beyond traditional expectations. My first notable cultural misstep occurred during the Mid-Autumn Festival, when I inadvertently offered the wrong type of mooncake to my department head, a faux pas equivalent to bringing Halloween candy to Thanksgiving dinner. Rather than taking offense, she used the moment to invite me to her family celebration, where 3 generations gathered to share elaborate meals, tell traditional stories, and light lanterns that floated into the night sky like earthbound stars seeking reunion with the heavens. This evening marked a turning point in my cultural integration, the beginning of genuine friendships beyond professional courtesy. 6 months into my stay, Christine announced her intention to visit during her children's spring break. "We're all coming. Mark, Emma, Tyler. We want to see this life you've created." Her tone contained something new, not just acceptance of my choice, but genuine interest in understanding it firsthand. Their arrival coincided with the beginning of April, as Ho Chi Minh City transitioned from the dry season to the monsoon months. Christine, whose business travels had always involved luxury hotels and carefully curated experiences, initially seemed overwhelmed by the sensory intensity of Vietnam. The heat, the crowds, the unfamiliar foods, the constant negotiation required for even simple transactions. Mark appeared more adaptable, quickly developing a taste for local coffee and an appreciation for the city's architectural contrasts. The children, with their natural resilience, embraced the adventure wholeheartedly, eagerly trying exotic fruits, attempting basic Vietnamese phrases, and forming instant connections with neighborhood children despite language barriers. I had arranged a light teaching schedule during their visit, allowing me to guide them through both tourist highlights and my everyday world. We visited the War Remnants Museum, where Christine was moved to tears by photographs documenting the human cost of conflict. We explored the Cu Chi tunnels, where Mark gained new respect for the Vietnamese determination as he struggled to navigate the enlarged for tourists underground passageways. We wandered through Ben Thanh Market, where Emma proved surprisingly adept at bargaining with vendors, and Tyler discovered a passion for tropical fish that would later influence his college major. More meaningful than these tourist experiences were the glimpses into my daily life, joining me for morning Tai Chi in the local park, sitting in on one of my conversation classes, meeting the neighbors who had become my informal cultural guides, dining at the small family restaurant where I took most evening meals. Through these ordinary moments, my family began to understand what I had found in Vietnam. Not just adventure, but purpose, community, and a renewed sense of capability. On their final evening, as we enjoyed dinner on the rooftop restaurant of their hotel, Christine made an observation that revealed how profoundly her perspective had shifted. "You know what I realized, Mom? When we suggested you move to that senior community back home, we were thinking about what would make us comfortable, having you in a predictable, controlled environment that matched our expectations for someone your age. We never considered what would make you thrive." "That's an important distinction," I acknowledged. "Seeing you here, navigating this chaotic city, teaching students from completely different backgrounds, building a life from scratch. At 62, it's completely changed how I think about aging." She gestured toward the cityscape spread below us, neon lights beginning to illuminate the dusk. "You're more vibrant here, more engaged than I've seen you in years. This wasn't just a rejection of our plans for you. It was an embrace of something better." Mark, who had been quietly attentive throughout the conversation, added his own observation. "I've been thinking about that old Honda you drove, the one we all found so amusingly outdated. I realize now it represented something crucial: the freedom that comes from making choices based on values rather than appearances. The irony, Christine admitted, is that we thought we were the sophisticated ones with our luxury cars and designer clothes, while you were the one stuck in outdated thinking. But your choices were actually more intentional, more aligned with your true priorities than ours have been. This acknowledgement, free from defensiveness or qualification, represented growth I hadn't dared hope for when I handed out those envelopes 6 months earlier. Not just acceptance of my choices, but genuine reconsideration of their own. As they prepared to depart the following morning, Emma presented me with a handmade book titled Grandma's Vietnam Adventure, filled with her drawings of our experiences, together and spaces for photographs I would send in the coming months. Tyler offered a carefully folded origami crane, explaining that his research indicated it symbolized good fortune and longevity in Asian cultures. These thoughtful gifts reflected a quality I had always hoped to develop in my grandchildren: attention to what matters to others rather than assumption about what should matter. After their departure, my Vietnamese experience deepened in unexpected ways. A senior faculty member invited me to collaborate on developing specialized English curriculum for medical professionals, drawing on Ryan's input about healthcare terminology. A local orphanage requested weekly English lessons for their older children, creating an opportunity to work with Vietnam's most vulnerable youth. A cultural exchange program asked me to host American students during their study abroad semester, allowing me to bridge my former and current worlds. My second major family visit came 4 months later, when Melissa arrived alone for a meticulously planned 10-day stay. Where Christine's family had approached Vietnam as an adventure, Melissa engaged with it as a subject of study, arriving with spreadsheets of research questions, cultural observations to verify, and a detailed itinerary that required gentle modification to accommodate the unpredictable rhythm of Vietnamese life. Yet beneath her analytical approach lay genuine curiosity and growing respect. She attended several of my classes, taking detailed notes on my teaching methodology and student interactions. She accompanied me to meetings of the scholarship committee, offering legal expertise to strengthen the program's structure. She even joined me for early morning Tai Chi, her precise mind appreciating the disciplined movements while her typically tense body struggled to adopt the required fluidity. On her 6th evening, as we shared banh xeo, Vietnamese savory crepes, at my favorite local restaurant, Melissa revealed the personal revelation that had been forming throughout her visit. "I've been doing some calculations," she began in characteristic fashion. "Based on your lifestyle here, the apartment, the local food, the modest entertainment expenses, you're living on approximately 1/5 of what I spend each month in the States." I nodded, unsurprised by her financial analysis. "Yet your quality of life, measured by meaningful work, social connections, cultural engagement, and daily satisfaction, appears significantly higher than mine." She delivered this assessment with the same detached precision she might use to evaluate a legal brief. This creates a compelling argument that past a certain threshold, additional expenditure produces diminishing returns on actual well-being. I smiled at her lawyer's formulation of what philosophers and spiritual teachers have emphasized for centuries. That's been my experience, yes. I've been working 80-hour weeks to maintain a lifestyle that doesn't actually maximize my happiness, she continued, the clinical tone giving way to something more vulnerable. I own a condominium filled with expensive furniture I rarely see, a closet of designer clothes I'm too busy to enjoy, and a premium gym membership I use perhaps twice monthly due to work demands. This level of personal reflection was unprecedented from my practical, achievement-oriented daughter. "What are you considering?" I asked gently. "A recalibration of priorities," she replied. "Not necessarily Vietnam, but perhaps a reassessment of how I allocate my most precious resources, time and attention." By the end of her visit, Melissa had drafted what she called her life optimization plan, a detailed framework for adjusting her work-life balance, financial priorities, and personal development goals. Though the format reflected her methodical nature, the content revealed a profound shift in values, from external achievements to internal well-being, from accumulation to experience, from professional advancement to personal growth. As she prepared to depart, she handed me a legal envelope. "I've restructured the family emergency fund we created from your checks," she explained. "It's now the Mitchell Family Educational Trust, designed to support intergenerational learning experiences. The first distribution will finance Ryan's children visiting you during their summer break, with designated funds for cultural activities and language instruction." This transformation of financial resources into meaningful connection exemplified exactly the principle I had tried to demonstrate through my own choices. "That's a wonderful reallocation," I told her, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness behind the legal documentation. "It's just sound resource management," she replied with characteristic understatement, though the slight softening around her eyes conveyed deeper meaning. Maximizing returns on available capital. Ryan's visit came 3 months later, bringing his teenage children for their first international experience. At 16 and 14, Aiden and Sophia initially approached Vietnam with the performance of boredom typical of adolescence, their attention seemingly captive to their smartphones, rather than their surroundings. But Vietnam's vivid sensory landscape gradually penetrated their digital absorption. Sophia discovered unexpected passion for Vietnamese cuisine, progressing from reluctant tasting to enthusiastic exploration of street food stalls, eventually requesting cooking lessons from my neighbor who had become a surrogate grandmother figure during my stay. Aiden, whose interests had previously centered almost exclusively on competitive gaming, developed fascination with the architectural preservation challenges facing a rapidly modernizing city, taking hundreds of photographs documenting the juxtaposition of historic and contemporary structures. Ryan himself seemed to undergo the most profound transformation of all my children. The controlled, achievement-oriented surgeon gradually relaxed into a more present, engaged father, as daily hospital emergencies gave way to shared discoveries with his children. I watched him rediscover curiosity, playfulness, and wonder, qualities that had been gradually suppressed beneath professional demands and status consciousness. One evening, as we enjoyed sunset on the rooftop garden of my apartment building, Ryan reflected on how his perspective had evolved since that night at a Riverstone restaurant. "When you handed us those envelopes, I felt like you were rejecting everything I'd worked for. The professional success, the financial security, the lifestyle I'd built. It seemed like criticism of my choices." "That wasn't my intention," I assured him. "I know that now," he acknowledged. "You weren't saying my path was wrong. You were asserting your right to a different path, one that prioritized meaning over status, experience over possessions." He gestured toward his teenagers, who were across the rooftop attempting to capture the perfect sunset photograph. Watching. "You reinvent yourself at 62 has made me question whether I should wait until retirement to pursue what really matters. Aiden and Sophia will be gone in a few years. The hospital will always have surgeries scheduled." This reflective awareness from my once relentlessly achievement-driven son represented perhaps the most meaningful outcome of my unorthodox retirement choice, not just reclaiming my own narrative, but creating permission for my children to examine theirs with fresh perspective. As we walked back to my apartment through streets now growing familiar to Ryan and his children, he shared a decision that had been forming throughout their visit. "I'm thinking of taking a 6-month sabbatical. Next year?" he said, the words carrying the weight of significant departure from his carefully structured career path. "The hospital has a partnership with Doctors Without Borders. They've been asking for orthopedic surgeons to train local medical staff in rural areas of Southeast Asia." "That sounds meaningful," I responded, careful not to overlay my enthusiasm. On to what was clearly a complex decision for him. "It would mean stepping off the chief of surgery track," he admitted. Harrison would likely take the position instead. Is that important to you, being chief of surgery? He considered this question with unusual thoughtfulness. It was, or at least I thought it was. The title, the recognition, the sense of having reached the pinnacle of my profession. He shook his head slightly. But watching you here, building something meaningful without any of the traditional markers of success or status, it's made me reconsider what actually matters. His teenagers rejoined us, Sophia proudly displaying the sunset photographs she'd captured, Aiden describing an architectural concept inspired by the building across the street. Their animated engagement, so different from the affected boredom they'd arrived with, seemed to reinforce something in Ryan's thinking. Life keeps moving whether we're present for it or not, he observed quietly. I don't want to postpone what matters until some theoretical future when everything aligns perfectly. This perspective, so different from the status-conscious son, who had once mocked my faithful Honda, revealed how deeply the ripples of my decision had penetrated our family system. My choice hadn't been about rejection of their values, but affirmation of my own. Yet in that affirmation lay implicit permission for them to question priorities they had absorbed without examination. The remainder of Ryan's visit unfolded with newfound presence and appreciation. Rather than maintaining constant contact with his office as originally planned, he fully immersed in Vietnamese culture, joining my early morning neighborhood walking group, attempting basic Vietnamese phrases with shopkeepers, patiently exploring museums and historical sites that his former schedule-driven self would have deemed inefficient uses of limited time. On their final evening, we shared dinner at my apartment, a meal prepared together from ingredients selected at the local market that morning. As we enjoyed the results of our culinary collaboration, Aiden surprised me with a thoughtful question. Grandma, were you scared when you moved here? Like not knowing anyone or speaking the language? The question revealed a depth of consideration I hadn't necessarily expected from my gaming-obsessed grandson. Terrified, I admitted honestly. The night before my flight, I seriously considered canceling everything and accepting your father's original plan for a sensible retirement community back home. What stopped you? Sophia asked, genuinely curious. The realization that temporary discomfort is the price of growth, I replied, and that safety, while comforting, can become a cage if it prevents us from exploring our potential. Aiden nodded thoughtfully. I'm applying to architecture programs next year. Everyone expects me to choose somewhere close to home, but I've been looking at universities in Japan and Singapore. This trip has kind of made me think I could actually do it. Ryan's expression revealed surprise, but not disapproval. Another shift from the carefully controlled life path he had previously expected his children to follow. We can explore those options, he said, the words clearly uncomfortable but sincerely offered, if that's where your passion leads. After their departure, my Vietnamese life resumed its established rhythms, yet something had subtly shifted. My children's visits had transformed Vietnam from an abstract concept in their minds, a strange choice made by their unpredictable mother, into a tangible reality they had experienced firsthand. Their direct engagement with my new life had bridged understanding in ways that weekly video calls and blog posts never could, converting intellectual acknowledgement into visceral recognition of how thoroughly I had rebuilt my identity beyond their narrow expectations. As my 2-year teaching commitment approached its conclusion, the director of the Language Academy requested a meeting to discuss my future plans. I had deliberately avoided making firm decisions, wanting to experience the full cycle of seasons, both meteorological and emotional, before determining my next steps. We value your contributions enormously, Director Nguyen began, her formal English carrying the measured cadence of someone who had learned the language through academic study rather than immersion. Your teaching methodologies have transformed our business English program, and your cultural insights have proven invaluable to our study abroad students. She placed a folder on the table between us. We would like to offer you a permanent position as senior curriculum developer and teacher trainer, with the flexibility to create your own teaching schedule. The offer was generous, acknowledging both my professional expertise and my personal circumstances as a foreigner with family connections elsewhere. You could structure the role to include extended periods in your home country, she continued, anticipating my potential concerns. Perhaps 6 months here, 6 months there, with remote curriculum development possible from anywhere with internet access. This proposal, unexpectedly aligned with thoughts already forming in my own mind, offered an elegant solution to the binary choice between staying in Vietnam or returning to the United States. It would allow me to maintain the meaningful work and cultural engagement I had discovered in Ho Chi Minh City, while still nurturing relationships with my growing family back home. I'm honored by your confidence, I told her sincerely. May I have some time to consider the details? Of course, she nodded, though I should mention that Mr. Tran from the orphanage program specifically requested your continued involvement. The children have shown remarkable progress under your guidance. This mention of the orphanage, where I had been volunteering weekly for the past year, touched something deeper than professional pride. Those children, many abandoned due to disabilities or developmental differences that Vietnamese society still struggled to accommodate, had become unexpectedly significant in my life. Their resilience, their eagerness to learn despite profound challenges, their delight in small accomplishments, these had enriched my experience in ways no tourist attraction or cultural excursion ever could. Walking home through streets now comfortably familiar, I reflected on how thoroughly my identity had evolved during these 2 years abroad. The teacher who had dutifully maintained aging classroom materials for decades had become an educational innovator, developing specialized curricula for diverse learner populations. The widow who had defined herself primarily through motherhood had expanded into a multifaceted identity encompassing professional expertise, cultural adaptability, and community engagement. The woman whose adult children had deemed ready for assisted living had established independence in one of Asia's most dynamic cities, navigating complex cultural and linguistic landscapes with growing confidence. That evening, I initiated a family video call to share news of the job offer and discuss how it might shape our collective future. Christine joined from her home office, Ryan from his hospital break room, and Melissa from an airport lounge during a business trip, the modern family gathering spanning time zones and professional obligations. A split arrangement makes tremendous sense, Christine observed immediately, her marketing mind recognizing the elegant compromise. You maintain the meaningful work and cultural engagement you found in Vietnam while still being present for family milestones. The 6-month rotation would align perfectly with the children's academic calendar, Ryan added. You could be stateside during their summer break and winter holidays. From a logistical perspective, Melissa contributed predictably, maintaining dual resident status creates certain tax advantages I'd be happy to outline in a separate document. Their immediate support, free from the judgment, concern, or condescension that had characterized their earlier reactions to my choices, demonstrated how profoundly our family dynamic had evolved since that night at Riverstone Restaurant. The mother they had once viewed as needing management and direction was now recognized as capable of creating an innovative life path aligned with her authentic values. I appreciate your perspectives, I told them, though I'm still weighing certain aspects of the decision. Like what? Christine asked. Like whether alternating between 2 worlds might prevent full immersion in either, I explained. Whether the constant transitions would become exhausting rather than enriching as I grow older. Mom, Ryan said gently, you've just spent 2 years proving that age is a meaningless predictor of capacity for adaptation and growth. Whatever you decide, we trust your judgment. These words, we trust your judgment, represented perhaps the most significant transformation in our relationship. From children who had once planned my retirement without consultation to adult offspring who recognized my autonomy and wisdom, the journey had been remarkable for all of us. The decision crystallized during a conversation with the young woman who had met me at the airport 2 years earlier and had since become both colleague and friend. "You know," she observed as we shared coffee at our favorite cafe, "in Vietnamese culture, we believe the fullest life maintains connection with its roots while continuing to grow new branches. Perhaps your next chapter doesn't require choosing between Vietnam and America, but finding a way to honor both." Her wisdom echoed in my thoughts as I finalized negotiations with Director Nguyen, agreeing to a modified version of her proposal. I would serve as senior curriculum developer and teacher trainer for 8 months annually in Vietnam, with 4 consecutive months based in the United States, maintaining remote curriculum development responsibilities while strengthening family connections. This arrangement would continue for an initial 2-year period, with opportunities for adjustment based on both institutional needs and personal circumstances. My first extended return to the United States was scheduled to coincide with Christine's 3rd child's first birthday, a grandchild conceived after my departure for Vietnam, named Daniel after my late husband. The anticipation of meeting this newest family member, of witnessing firsthand the changes in my other grandchildren, and of re-establishing physical presence in the lives of my adult children filled me with both excitement and trepidation. How would it feel to return to the culture I had temporarily left behind? Would I experience reverse culture shock, struggling to readjust to American norms after adapting to Vietnamese ways? Would the relationships that had evolved through digital connection translate smoothly into in-person interaction? These questions accompanied me on the long journey from Ho Chi Minh City to Minneapolis, where Christine would meet me for the drive to her suburban home. The initial reunion overwhelmed my senses. Christine's embrace at the airport, the familiar scent of her perfume, the sound of her voice unmediated by digital compression, the physical presence of my daughter after 2 years of screen-based connection. Together, we navigated the highway system that had once been routine, but now seemed remarkably spacious and orderly compared to Vietnam's chaotic traffic patterns. "Everything looks so organized," I observed, noting the precise lane markings, the methodical traffic flow, the expansive distances between buildings. Christine laughed. "I never thought about it until visiting you in Vietnam, but American spaces are designed for cars rather than people, aren't they? All this asphalt, these massive parking lots, these buildings set far back from sidewalks, it's the opposite of those vibrant Vietnamese streets." Her observation, comparing American and Vietnamese urban planning through a critical rather than hierarchical lens, revealed how her perspective had expanded through direct exposure to alternative cultural approaches. The daughter who had once viewed Vietnamese life as inherently inferior to American standards now recognized different but equally valid prioritizations: community engagement and pedestrian access in Vietnam versus efficiency and automobile accommodation in the United States. Arriving at Christine's home, a substantial house in an upscale neighborhood, I experienced momentary disorientation. After 2 years in my modest Vietnamese apartment, the sheer size of American middle-class housing struck me as simultaneously luxurious and excessive. The formal living room rarely used, the multiple bathrooms serving a single family, the expansive kitchen with specialized appliances, all reflected abundance beyond functional necessity. "It seems so much bigger than I remembered," I commented as Christine showed me to the guest suite prepared for my 4-month stay. "It is bigger," she admitted somewhat sheepishly. "We finished the basement remodel while you were away. But honestly, after seeing how comfortably you live in your apartment in Vietnam, I've been rethinking all this space. We're paying to heat and cool rooms we barely use." Again, her reflection indicated evolving perspectives rather than defensive justification. Another sign of our transformed relationship. The daughter who had once judged my modest home as falling apart now questioned her own spatial expectations, considering functionality and resource allocation rather than status and impression management. Meeting baby Daniel, a chubby, cheerful infant with his grandfather's distinctive dimple, brought the physical and emotional connection I had missed during his early months. Unlike my previous grandchildren, whose infancies I had experienced from the beginning, Daniel represented new growth occurring during my absence, a tangible reminder that life continued its forward momentum regardless of my geographical location. Emma and Tyler, now 11 and 9, had matured notably during my 2-year absence. Emma greeted me with sophisticated questions about Vietnamese education systems, having developed genuine interest in international teaching practices. Tyler presented a carefully researched report on Southeast Asian ecosystems, inspired by our virtual explorations of Vietnamese biodiversity. Their engagement reflected not perfunctory politeness toward a grandparent, but authentic curiosity nurtured through meaningful digital connection despite physical distance. The family celebration for baby Daniel's first birthday gathered extended family members, many curious about my Vietnamese experiences. The questions revealed varying degrees of cultural awareness, from thoughtful inquiries about educational differences to awkward assumptions about exotic customs, to well-intentioned but patronizing expressions of concern about primitive conditions. Rather than feeling defensive or frustrated by these reactions, I recognized them as reflections of limited exposure rather than intentional ignorance, responding with patient education rather than judgment. More significant than these extended, family interactions were the deepening conversations with my adult children as my stay progressed. Christine, juggling career demands and 3 children of different ages, sought my perspective on balancing professional identity with family engagement, a challenge I had navigated during her own childhood, though under different economic circumstances. "You always made it look seamless," she observed during a rare, quiet evening after the younger children were asleep. "Working full-time, maintaining the house, attending every school event, preparing home-cooked meals. I'm drowning trying to manage half of what you accomplished." "It wasn't seamless," I corrected gently. "You're remembering a sanitized version through a child's perspective. There were countless frozen dinners, mountains of unfolded laundry, nights of inadequate sleep, moments of resentment and exhaustion." She looked surprised by this revelation. "You never showed that side." "Because children need security, not adult burdens," I explained. "But now, as equals, I can acknowledge that the perfect balance doesn't exist. There are just different compromises at different life stages." This honest conversation, free from the performative capability I had maintained during her childhood, and the defensive self-justification that had characterized our early adult relationship, represented a new depth of authentic connection. We were simply 2 women discussing the universal challenges of combining motherhood with professional identity, each respecting the other's perspective without hierarchy or presumption. Similar evolution occurred in my relationship with Ryan, particularly following his decision to accept the 6-month medical mission with Doctors Without Borders. Having secured approval for a sabbatical from his hospital position, sacrificing potential advancement to chief of surgery as predicted, he sought practical advice about navigating a significant life transition in his late 40s. "I keep vacillating between excitement and terror," he admitted during one of our regular coffee meetings. "The work itself will be meaningful, but the thought of stepping completely outside my controlled environment, my reputation, my established routines, it's more destabilizing than I expected." "That threshold between familiar and unknown is always uncomfortable," I acknowledged. "I felt physically ill the week before leaving for Vietnam. But that discomfort is the space where growth happens." "How did you push through it?" "By recognizing that security and growth rarely coexist," I offered. "Staying within familiar patterns feels safe, but ultimately constraining. Breaking those patterns feels terrifying, but creates possibility." He nodded thoughtfully. The medical parallel would be that bones grow stronger after stress fractures properly healed. Without controlled damage and recovery, there's no increased strength. Exactly. I smiled at his physician's perspective, though perhaps with less emphasis on the fracture aspect of life transitions. These conversations with Ryan, centered on vulnerability, uncertainty, and personal evolution rather than professional achievements, financial acquisitions, or status markers, revealed how thoroughly our relationship had transformed since that night he had mocked my Honda in the restaurant parking lot. The son who had once defined success primarily through external validation now questioned whether those metrics had led him toward genuine fulfillment, recognizing that material abundance without purpose or presence created wealth without richness. Melissa's evolution manifested differently, consistent with her analytical personality. Following through on the life optimization plan she had developed during her Vietnamese visit, she had methodically redesigned her professional trajectory, transitioning from corporate law to nonprofit work, providing legal services to immigrants and refugees. This shift had required significant financial recalibration, moving from her luxury downtown condominium to a modest townhouse, reducing discretionary spending on designer goods, and reconsidering what constituted necessary versus optional expenditures. I've reduced my monthly expenses by 43% while increasing my satisfaction metrics by an estimated 68%, she reported during one of our regular dinners. Her lawyer's precision applied to personal transformation. How exactly does one measure satisfaction? Metrics? I asked, amused by her characteristic approach. I developed a weighted scale, she explained with complete seriousness, pulling out her phone to display a complex spreadsheet. Factors include work engagement, sleep quality, meaningful social connection, creative expression, and physical well-being, each tracked daily and aggregated monthly. Rather than finding this methodical approach cold or mechanical, I recognized it as Melissa's authentic way of processing significant life changes, applying her analytical strengths to personal development just as she had always applied them to professional challenges. The daughter who had once channeled her intelligence primarily toward material acquisition and status achievement now directed those same cognitive gifts toward optimizing genuine well-being and meaningful contribution. Beyond these individual evolutions, I observed broader shifts in our family culture during my 4-month stay. Sunday dinners rotated between my children's homes, with meaningful conversation replacing performance and presentation. Financial resources, once directed primarily toward status symbols and material upgrades, increasingly supported experiences and connections. Christine's family exploring national parks instead of purchasing a larger boat. Ryan funding music lessons for underserved children in his neighborhood, rather than upgrading his already luxury vehicle. Melissa establishing a scholarship for refugee students, rather than maintaining her designer wardrobe budget. These changes, while influenced by my example, represented their authentic choices rather than capitulation to external pressure. Exactly the autonomy I had sought to reclaim for myself that night at Riverstone Restaurant. My children weren't becoming less ambitious or successful in conventional terms, but were bringing greater intentionality to how they defined and pursued success, considering purpose and impact alongside financial metrics and status markers. As my scheduled return to Vietnam approached, I experienced complex emotions about this transitional existence. The recognition that I now belonged partially to two worlds, rather than fully to either. My American family connections had deepened during these months of physical proximity, yet I found myself increasingly eager to return to my Vietnamese students, colleagues, and routines. This neither here nor there identity created both liberation and occasional disorientation, requiring constant navigation of cultural expectations and personal values. My final weeks in the United States included practical preparations, banking arrangements, medical checkups, technology updates, alongside emotional transitions. Christine organized a family gathering at her home the evening before my departure, inviting only my children and grandchildren for an intimate farewell dinner. As we shared the meal Christine had carefully prepared, incorporating Vietnamese flavors she had learned to appreciate during her visit, conversation flowed easily between reflections on my recent stay and anticipation of continued connection across continents. The grandchildren presented me with thoughtful gifts for my return journey. Emma had created a dual-language picture book about family connections across distances. Tyler had assembled a digital photo frame loaded with family images. Baby Daniel offered a handprint ornament Christine had helped him create. After dinner, as the younger children played in the backyard and baby Daniel napped upstairs, my 3 adult children presented me with a final surprise. Ryan handed me a small velvet pouch containing a delicate gold compass pendant on a chain. "Because you've always helped us find our way," he explained, "and shown us that new directions are possible at any age. It's waterproof and actually functional," Melissa added pragmatically, making us all laugh at her characteristic attention to practical details. "And because we want you to always find your way back to us," Christine completed, "no matter how far your adventures take you." I fastened the necklace, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and what it represented. Not an attempt to constrain my path, but a recognition of my autonomy to choose it, coupled with the hope of continued connection despite geographical separation. "There's one more thing," Christine said, exchanging glances with her siblings. "We've been talking and we've decided what to do with the checks you gave us that night at your retirement dinner." Ryan nodded. "We've pooled the money to establish the Barbara Mitchell Global Education Fund. It will provide travel scholarships for educators over 50, Melissa elaborated, supporting those who wish to teach internationally but lack financial resources for the transition. Because we've seen firsthand how life-changing that opportunity can be," Christine added. "Not just for the teacher, but for everyone whose perspective is expanded through their journey." This transformation of the funds I had given them, from symbolic inheritance representing my financial capability to seed money for others' transformative experiences, perfectly captured the evolution in our family's relationship with material resources. Money had shifted from being primarily a status marker to being a tool for creating meaningful impact, from signifying personal success to enabling collective contribution. "That's a beautiful vision," I acknowledged, genuinely moved by their collaborative creativity. "Thank you for understanding so completely what this journey has meant to me." "We didn't understand initially," Ryan admitted candidly. "We thought you were being impulsive, even irresponsible. We thought we knew better than you what would constitute an appropriate retirement," Melissa added with unusual emotional directness, "based on assumptions about aging that have proven entirely unfounded. We thought success looked like our lives, the houses, the cars, the professional status," Christine completed. "It took watching you create something entirely different but equally valid to recognize our limited perspective." This acknowledgement, free from defensiveness or qualification, represented the full circle of our family's transformation since that night at Riverstone Restaurant. The children who had once planned my retirement without consultation now recognized not only my right to self-determination, but the wisdom embedded in choices they had initially dismissed as limitations rather than priorities. My return to Vietnam carried none of the anxiety that had accompanied my original journey 2 years earlier. The familiar humidity embraced me as I exited the airport, Mai waiting with her warm smile and quick humor to navigate me back to my apartment in District 3. The neighborhood market vendors greeted me by name, asking about my American family and commenting on how thin I looked after months away, the Vietnamese equivalent of grandmotherly concern about adequate nutrition. Resuming my modified role at the Language Academy, now focused more on curriculum development and teacher training than direct classroom instruction, provided immediate reconnection to meaningful work. My twice-weekly visits to the orphanage re-established bonds with children whose developmental progress during my absence filled me with both professional satisfaction and personal joy. Morning Tai Chi in the local park reintegrated me into the community routine that had become an essential component of my Vietnamese identity. As the first year of my split arrangement unfolded, 8 months in Vietnam, 4 months in the United States, I discovered unexpected benefits beyond the obvious balance between meaningful work and family connection. The perspective gained through regular movement between cultures allowed me to recognize both strengths and limitations in each context, appreciating American efficiency without automatically devaluing Vietnamese community orientation, or embracing Vietnamese multi-generational support systems without romanticizing aspects that could be genuinely constraining. This dual cultural immersion also influenced my professional contributions in both contexts. My Vietnamese curriculum development incorporated effective American pedagogical approaches while respecting local cultural values. My remote consultation with American educators during Vietnamese residence introduced cross-cultural perspectives that enriched their teaching practices. Rather than creating divided loyalty, this transnational existence expanded my effectiveness in both environments. The pattern established during that first year continued through subsequent cycles, creating a rhythmic alternation that suited my desire for both meaningful work and family connection. Each transition between countries became smoother, my ability to mentally shift between cultural contexts, developing into an almost automatic adjustment. Vietnam represented professional purpose, cultural immersion, and continued growth. The United States represented family bonds, cultural familiarity, and intergenerational connection. Together, they created a more complete life than either could have provided exclusively. My children's lives continued evolving as well, influenced but not determined by the example I had established. Christine gradually restructured her marketing career to incorporate more remote work, reducing commuting time and increasing family engagement without sacrificing professional contribution. Ryan returned from his medical mission with both enhanced surgical skills and transformed perspective, establishing a nonprofit foundation providing orthopedic services to underserved communities locally and internationally. Melissa's life optimization plan continued generating impressive satisfaction metrics as she built a meaningful legal career supporting immigrant rights while maintaining balanced personal wellness. The grandchildren, now including 3-year-old Daniel alongside teenagers Emma and Tyler, and Ryan's increasingly independent Aiden and Sophia, developed comfortable familiarity with their grandmother's unconventional life pattern. They anticipated Vietnamese gifts and stories during my American stays, maintained digital connection during my international periods, and incorporated global awareness into their developing worldviews as a natural extension of family experience, rather than abstract educational concept. 5 years after handing those envelopes to my children at Riverstone Restaurant, I celebrated my 67th birthday with a gathering that perfectly embodied my transnational existence. My Vietnamese colleagues organized a morning celebration at the Language Academy, complete with traditional birthday noodles symbolizing long life. My American family joined virtually from various locations: Christine from her home office, Ryan from a medical conference in Bangkok, Melissa from her refugee legal clinic, grandchildren from school and sports activities, their faces appearing on a tablet decorated with streamers by my Vietnamese students. Later that evening, I joined my Vietnamese friends for dinner at my favorite local restaurant, where the conversation flowed between English and Vietnamese as naturally as breathing, cultural boundaries blurring through years of mutual adaptation and genuine connection. The restaurant owner, who had initially viewed me with polite curiosity as an American oddity, now treated me with the familiar affection reserved for regular patrons, selecting special dishes without consultation and refusing payment despite my protests. Returning to my apartment, the same modest space I had occupied since arriving in Vietnam, I reflected on the journey that had unfolded from that pivotal moment when my children's mockery of my faithful Honda had crystallized something essential about our relationship dynamic. Their laughter at what they perceived as limitation rather than choice had catalyzed my decision to reclaim authorship of my own story, to insist on recognition of my agency rather than acceptance of their management. The envelopes I had presented that night contained checks, yes. But their true contents had been permission. For me to live authentically despite others' expectations. For my children to reconsider assumptions about aging and success. And for all of us to recognize that life's most meaningful journeys rarely follow predetermined paths. They tend to unfold according to values often invisible to external observers, creating narratives far richer than conventional metrics of status or acquisition could possibly measure. This understanding, that true wealth lies in alignment between choices and values rather than accumulation of possessions or prestige, had transformed not just my retirement experience, but my entire family system. My children had evolved from viewing success primarily through external validation to considering purpose, presence, and impact alongside professional achievement and material comfort. My grandchildren were developing from childhood with awareness that multiple valid approaches to life existed beyond prevailing cultural assumptions about what constituted appropriate aspirations or acceptable timelines. As I prepared for sleep, my Vietnamese neighbor's radio playing traditional music through our shared wall, my American family's birthday messages illuminating my phone screen, I felt profound gratitude for this unexpected life. Neither the conventional American retirement my children had planned for me nor the continued teaching career I had envisioned for myself, but something richer and more complex than either singular path could have provided. The Honda that had sparked this transformation was long gone, sold to a young teacher who appreciated reliability over flash, just as I had for decades. Yet its essence remained in every conscious choice to prioritize meaning over status, purpose over perception, authenticity over accommodation. That faithful vehicle, mocked by my status-conscious children but integral to their debt-free education and my financial independence, had carried me not just through physical journeys but toward the courage to define success on my own terms regardless of others' expectations. And that, I reflected as sleep approached, was the most valuable destination of all. The recognition that at any age, we retain the right and responsibility to author our own stories, to allocate our resources according to our authentic values, and to measure success by internal alignment rather than external validation. The old Honda, once a source of family humor, had ultimately transported us all to an unexpected place of mutual respect, intentional choice, and expanded possibility. Not a bad legacy for a vehicle that had faithfully served its purpose long, beyond conventional expectation, much like its owner, who at 67 continued discovering new capacity for growth, connection, and contribution, when society assumed diminishment was inevitable. Some vehicles, like some people, contain wisdom within apparent ordinariness that becomes visible only to those willing to look beyond surface appearance to recognize the journeys made possible through consistent reliability, intentional maintenance, and values-based choices. My children had finally learned to see beyond the rusted exterior of that Honda to recognize the freedom it represented, just as they had learned to see beyond societal expectations of aging to recognize their mother's continuing capacity for meaningful contribution and personal evolution. That recognition, that surfaces often obscure substance, that conventional metrics frequently miss genuine value, had transformed our family relationships from hierarchical management to mutual respect, from assumed limitation to recognized wisdom. 5 years after those envelopes changed everything, we had all discovered that the most valuable inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to live authentically, courageously, and purposefully, even when it defies expectations. Especially when it defies expectations. The following morning, I woke to messages from all 3 of my children, each responding to birthday photographs I had shared showing my Vietnamese celebration. Christine had sent a picture of baby Daniel holding the handmade card they had created together. Ryan had shared news that Aiden's architecture school application to Singapore had been accepted with a substantial scholarship. Melissa had forwarded documentation of the first recipient selected for the Barbara Mitchell Global Education Fund, a 58-year-old science teacher from rural Minnesota preparing for a teaching position in Ecuador. These updates, seemingly mundane family communication, represented the culmination of our collective journey since that retirement dinner at Riverstone Restaurant. Christine's prioritization of creative engagement with her youngest child despite professional demands. Ryan's support for his son's international aspirations despite initial discomfort with geographical distance. Melissa's transformation of financial resources into meaningful impact rather than status symbols or material accumulation. None of these evolutions had occurred through direct instruction or explicit pressure. They had emerged organically from the example of someone they respected making choices aligned with authentic values rather than external expectations. Exactly the legacy I had hoped might develop from my unconventional retirement decision. As I prepared for another day of teaching and curriculum development in Vietnam, the compass necklace my children had given me resting against my collarbone, I smiled at the symmetry of our family's transformation. The mother who had once been deemed ready for assisted living continued expanding professional contribution across cultural contexts. The children who had once planned my retirement without consultation now sought my perspective on their own life transitions. The grandchildren who might never have experienced international perspectives were developing global awareness through direct engagement with their grandmother's transnational existence. The old Honda was gone, but its legacy remained in every conscious choice to define success according to meaningful impact rather than material acquisition. In every decision to allocate resources based on authentic values rather than social expectations. In every moment of recognizing that true wealth exists in alignment between choices and purpose, rather than accumulation of possessions or prestige. That faithful vehicle, once the source of family mockery but ultimately the catalyst for profound transformation, had carried us all to an unexpected destination. The recognition that at any age, we retain both the right and responsibility to author our own stories, to measure success by internal alignment, rather than external validation, and to create lives of meaning and purpose regardless of conventional timelines or societal assumptions. Not a bad journey for a prehistoric fossil once deemed worthy only of retirement to a museum, or a 62-year-old teacher once considered ready for storage in a senior community. Some vehicles, like some people, contain wisdom and capacity far beyond superficial appearance, visible only to those willing to look beyond conventional metrics to recognize the journeys made possible through consistent reliability, intentional maintenance, and values-based choices. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.